This is Jack Butler. This is the second interview with John Bunzl, founder of Simpol. And for this interview, I've kind of making an assumption that people have some awareness of the sort of integral framework and theory. Coming from that perspective, how does the sort of the integral perspective of multiple worldviews, how does that fit in with what you're trying to do at Simpol?
In a general context, I mean, Ken Wilber, for example, has talked about the dynamics of social transformation, of revolutionary social transformation, and what he says is that consciousness, you know, when the world reaches a stage of crisis,
yes,
something has deepened in the lower right, you know, in the world of our institutions and our day-to-day concrete world
yes,
that we're living in. Something has deepened, but our consciousness in the lower left, our consciousness is still lagging behind.
yes,
and that mismatch between consciousness and sort of outer reality is what brings on the crisis. So in concrete terms, what does that mean? That means that our world, our economy has gone global.
yes,
But the way we think about the world
yes,
is still what I call nation-centric.
yes.
Okay, so let me give you a typical example of that.
Yeah, do.
Bankers' bonuses.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so bankers' bonuses, everyone's sorely pissed off about bankers' bonuses. Me too. Everybody is, quite rightly, because it's obscene. But most people then expect the government,
Yes,
our government, to sort it out. And what they don't realise is that the way the world works today is global.
Yes.
You know, bankers' bonuses are set by global competitive forces, not
Yes.
by national
Yes.
norms.
Yes.
And so, you know, you can get angry if you want, but that's because you're still thinking about the world in a nation-centric,
Yes.
you know, with nation-centric glasses, if you like.
Yeah, sure.
When you think about them world-centrically, you realise that only something like Simpol or some global initiative of some kind can possibly deal with those kind of issues. And it's the same, not just with banker bonuses, but it's corporate power,
Yes.
global warming, Tobin tax, global poverty, you know, almost any global issue you care to think of, can only really be dealt with now through some kind of transnational
Yes.
cooperation and
Yes.
governance.
So is that to say, just picking up on the bankers example,
Yeah.
that if the UK were to institute policies to regulate that more heavily, in effect with global labour and global capital movement, that the banks would go, well, we don't like the environment here, we will move to Switzerland, we'll move to the Cayman Islands, we'll move elsewhere?
Broadly speaking, yes. I mean, I'm not saying that individual governments can't do anything.
Sure.
You know, there are some things that they can do, but you know, it's difficult
You're talking
to.
about sort of substantively.
Yeah, exactly. It's difficult to put a figure on it, but you know, whereas probably people expect them to sort of do 100% of the job.
Yes.
The amount of the job they're actually only really capable of doing independently is probably only about 20%.
Yes.
And it's the other 80% that can only be done through some kind of international cooperation.
Yes.
And you know, it's not just that the banks will decide to move elsewhere, or the corporations would decide to. They have to.
Yes.
Because you know they are in a competitive market. You know their share price is quoted on global markets.
Yes.
If they don't move to gain the advantage, or to avoid the disadvantage that they would be faced with in the UK if our government regulated, they would lose out to their competitors who may be based in China or you know South
Yes.
Africa or God knows where. So it's you know, in a sense, corporations are locked in this vicious circle system as well,
Yes.
just as governments
Yes.
are too.
Yes.
You know, so it's.
So is this a sort of prisoner's dilemma? Is
Yeah.
this game theory?
Yeah, I mean it's a classic game theory, prisoner's dilemma problem.
Yeah.
And you know the only way out of that is some kind of simultaneous action.
Yeah. What's the difference between global governance and global government?
Good question. I'm glad you asked me that, because I think this is where a lot of people misunderstand that. And I think, when we talk about global regulation or global governance or global anything, we tend to kind of project our national image,
yes,
our nation-centric image of government, and sort of blow that up to the global level, so that if you come from the UK, you'll imagine some kind of world parliament or some kind of government.
Yes.
Okay, but SIMPOL is something quite different. It's actually about a cooperative agreement where all nations move simultaneously. So there's not a question of some overarching government with a great big bureaucracy and all
yes.
that. It is much more in the nature of a simultaneously enacted agreement which is driven from the bottom up by citizens' votes.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's slightly different, it's a rather different model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does.
Right.
What's the role of sort of consciousness in this? I know you've talked a bit about civic consciousness in your writings.
Yeah.
I mean, are enough people ready for this?
Well, obviously not at the moment, no. But I like to think that people who are reaching...
When you say obviously not, do you mean sort of because it hasn't happened? Or
well, because consciousness is a very slow process. And
yes.
if you look at the sort of global values surveys, for example, you see that I think about 38% of people identify primarily with their locality.
yes.
Another 40-odd% identify with their nation. So there's about 80 or 85% of people in the world who are nation-centric or lower,
yes.
if you like, or
yes.
and only a relatively small percentage are looking at a broader global citizen
yes.
view, and so that's gradually moving towards more global thinking, and particularly younger people are much more global in their outlook.
Yes.
If you look at those figures by age.
Right.
There's a much higher proportion of younger people who are thinking globally or thinking transnationally, if you like, and thinking
yes.
in a wider, broader framework.
Huh.
And so
that's encouraging.
Yeah, which is encouraging. So as time goes on, I think you're going to see a shift. But also, I think the other driver for this is not just, well, they interact, is global circumstances. So as global events get worse and worse, as they will, until we have some kind of global governance,
yes.
that's going to push consciousness up, because we're going to have to think about how we're going to survive. And I think people are going to be pushed towards global cooperation, because it's either that or we regress, into chaos and,
yes.
and some really bad stuff.
Mm. Does this fit with the Einstein idea? Einstein said that problems can only be solved with level of consciousness that's greater than what created them.
Yeah, I've just done a talk with that title.
Oh, have you?
Yeah.
Right. I didn't know.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right, Jack. It's precisely that. And present problems are a product of rational thinking. They're a product of nation-centric thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Why can't we solve global warming? Well, it's not because we can't do it. It's because we're not cooperating. Because each nation has its own self-interested agenda and has
yes.
there is no framework for substantive international cooperation of the kind that I'm talking about.
Yes.
Nation-centric rational thinking has kind of hit the buffers, and we won't solve present problems with that thinking.
Model, yeah.
So we've got our thinking, and this comes back to where we started with the consciousness.
Yes.
It's got to move up now to the next level of what Wilbur calls vision logic,
yeah.
Which is a global way of thinking on spiral dynamics in turquoise. It is the global view. It is also a cool color, which means more of a community,
yes.
which is bound by certain regulations and norms. So this is what SIMPOL is about.
Yes. Do politicians get this? I mean, do politicians go to work every day sort of knowing that they're operating within these really confined boxes, but sort of pretending that we can still...
This is a really good question, Jack, because yes and no is the answer.
Right.
I mean, I think a lot of them don't. I mean, I think if politicians really realised how constrained they are, they would never have become politicians.
You think?
Yeah. But I don't think so. The answer is I don't think they do realise that. I mean, I think it was recently David Cameron, I think I'm right in saying that he said recently that, you know, one of the biggest shocks to becoming Prime Minister was, you know, he got into number 10, he pulled the lever and nothing happened. You know, so it's like,
really?
Yeah, so it's like, you know, what's going on? And so I don't think politicians are that aware, but not all of them. I mean, some years ago, we did a little mailing to all the UK parliamentarians, all 650 of them, and about 10 of them signed on, just from a letter from a campaign that they'd never heard of before.
Yes.
And I think the reason is that some of them probably do realise how constrained things have become, how the need to keep their nation competitive is actually degrading. It's forcing all political parties into a very narrow straitjacket, which is effectively a business-friendly agenda. You know? And so it doesn't really. I mean, you're sort of seeing this with the coalition at the moment in the UK, you know, and elsewhere. I mean, one party is increasingly looking very much like another once they get into office.
Yes.
And so. It's a good question. I mean, I think increasingly politicians will become increasingly aware, but ultimately citizens have got to become aware.
Yes.
You know, because if citizens don't get with the picture, with the global picture, we've really not got much hope.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I was aware of this. I've come back from a stint in the US, and you know, obviously a lot of people had great hopes for Barack Obama.
Yes.
And I think some people feel a similar thing may have happened, that actually having got into the Oval Office,
yes,
you realise that there's a,
yeah,
you know, it's a very difficult system to manipulate.
Yeah. I mean, I remember even in integral circles here in London, you know, when Barack Obama got it, you know, is Barack Obama integral, and all this sort of thing. And you know, he may or may not be, but to me the point is that any politician with a genuinely integral level of civic political awareness, who knows therefore how the global economic system would never become a national politician, because he would know that it's please wrap yourself up in a straitjacket. You know, they're just not going to, they wouldn't want to do it. And I think this is the way the world's going. You know, power now is no longer in the hands of an individual nation, or even of an individual market player.
Yes.
You know, there are some very powerful nations and people there, no question, but nobody has got all the cards, and so it's a much more fluid situation, which really nobody's in control of. You know, it's like we're all in this plane. It's veering dangerously out of control. You know, the rich and the business people are sitting in first class, and the rest of us are in coach class, and we all think there's a pilot, and then someone goes up the thing, opens the door to the cockpit, and there's nobody in there. You know, that's, you know, and we've got to get in there. All of us we've all got to get in there, because otherwise, the plane's going to crash. You know, sooner or later. Yes. So it's also that issue of taking responsibility, I think. You know, it's very fundamentally about saying, you know, we're not going to be victims anymore. We're not going to blame somebody else. We're going to, you know, we have to do this ourselves. You know, without being overblown about it or
yes, it's sort of responsible for that.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's what faces us.
And if you had to give some sense of timeline for this, I know that's almost an impossible question, but if you just had to give what you think is your best guess, or if things went incredibly well and everyone sort of heard your arguments
you see, I don't think there's anything I can say that will change anything. What will really drive this, I think, Jack, is global circumstances. You know, all that, say, something like Simpol can do is, if you like, build a little raft and cobble it together and tie it up with twine and maybe put up a sail or something. But what will really make the wind blow is not Simpol, it'll be global circumstances. It'll be, you know, a financial crisis, it'll be global warming, it'll be all the oil running out. It'll be all of these storms that are beginning to circle and are beginning to become more and more pressing and urgent.
Mm.
That's what will drive it.
Yeah. Anything else that you would like to add that we've not had a chance to talk about?
Not really, but it does come back to consciousness. It does come back to releasing ourselves from the idea that national governments have significant enough power
Yes.
to solve global problems. They don't. Get any politician over a beer on a quiet Saturday evening, and he'll tell you nothing they can do. There's very little they can do. But there's a kind of silent codependency going on.
Yeah,
which is like politicians have to pretend they've got power, because how else could they justify their salaries and their status? Whereas, but secretly they know they don't have that power. And we citizens kind of secretly know that they also don't have that power, but we don't want to admit that to ourselves, because then we wouldn't have anyone to blame when it all goes wrong. So there's an unholy
it's like a sort of transactional analysis, isn't it?
Hidden payoff going on,
yeah.
where citizens don't really want to go there because leave it to the politicians, then we can blame them for it, and the but similarly we're all going to have to wake up from this codependent dream.
Yes. And how does Green see this issue? Because obviously there's a lot of people mobilised. We were talking earlier about social media, VAS, etc. There's a lot of campaigns out there that seem to have really genuine, passionate, communitarian, well-meaning support.
That's right.
What would you say to that?
Well, I think the problem with Green has many very good campaigns, and they, as you say, they appeal very much to immediacy and our sense of injustice about the destruction of the environment or human rights, and these are very important. But Green tends not to see the fully systemic nature of destructive international competition, of the way, of the fact that because capital can move freely across national borders, this basically puts corporations and governments into a vicious circle they can't get out of. So while Green would happily blame corporations and governments, I think what second tier is going to see is that, well, actually, generally speaking, they're locked in a system they can't get out of, and we need to lead, a second tier global initiative towards, moving to a new level that resolves that dilemma.
Yes, I think it's quite a common thing for sort of Green to say, well, it's the system, we need to bring the system down. As if it's
but it will tend to, it says that, but then it will identify
kind of
Mr. Bad Corporation. It will be Tescopoly, or it'll be Nestle, or it'll be, I'm not saying these people don't need, these corporations don't need, taking down a peg or three. They do, but it's still identifying, in the end, it's protesting against, rather than realising that we're actually all in the same boat.
Yeah.
And that, I look at it not as us and them, or the 1% and the 99% as Occupy, but I see it as a big spiral where you may have the rich at the top and you may have the poor dying at the bottom and the rest of us sort of somewhere in between. But the point is that even the richest of the rich, he benefits from the system, yes, but that doesn't mean he can actually change the system. He doesn't have the power to change that system. Only we, all of us, have the power to do that. You see?
Yeah.
And so that's a much more inclusive, I would say realistic view of the way things really are, rather than, because I think also this idea that, we're victims, we don't have any power, it's all these sort of rich, powerful elites that control the world. That's a very convenient way to avoid abnegate responsibility.
Yeah. I think we're probably just about out of time, so thank you again for exploring these issues, and
Pleasure.
I'll ultimately wish you all the best with the campaign.
Thank you. Thanks for asking me.
Cheers.